It was a crowded afternoon, the kind of day where everyone was in a rush to get to where they needed to be. People were moving through the train station, each one lost in their own thoughts, hurrying along with little regard for what was happening around them. But in the middle of this ordinary scene, something extraordinary happened, something that would change a life forever. Imagine this: a black teenager, just trying to make his way home after a long day, sees an elderly woman struggling to stand. Without a second thought, he does what most would hesitate to do in such a busy place. He steps forward and offers her his seat. A simple, small act of kindness, right? But it's what happens next that no one could have predicted. The woman, standing with a slight waver in her step, glances at him, surprised but grateful. She doesn't say much at first, but the teenager notices something different about her. Something that feels off in the way she looks at him. And then, as the train jerks to a halt, she pulls out a small, folded note from her purse and hands it to him. The note, stained with the marks of years, holds words that no one could have imagined. Words that would change his life forever. But before we get to what that note said, let's rewind for a moment. Let's turn our attention to a completely different scene. One where a millionaire, surrounded by the luxury of his success, is about to do something so shocking, so heart-wrenching, that it leaves everyone around him speechless. This millionaire, who seemed to have everything, including an image of power and control, was about to lose it all in front of the one person he should have loved most, his own mother. The slap he delivered to her, with no regard for the eyes watching, would soon become the catalyst for a series of events that no one could foresee. You see, sometimes, when you have everything, you can lose sight of what really matters. And in that moment, as his elderly mother stood there, helpless and humiliated, something happened in the crowd. Something that no one expected. A bystander, who had witnessed the entire act of cruelty, would soon make a decision that would not only change the course of his life but also bring about a shocking revelation about the millionaire's past. Back at the station, the teenager, still holding the note in his hand, couldn't help but feel a strange sense of anticipation. What was this woman really trying to tell him? Why was she so determined to hand him this note, a note that seemed to carry more weight than just ink on paper? And as for the millionaire, what was it about his actions that were being watched so closely, by someone who held the power to change everything for him? The connections between these two stories, between the young man who gave up his seat and the millionaire who lost his dignity, were closer than they seemed. They were both linked by moments of human kindness and cruelty, by life-changing decisions made in an instant, by strangers whose paths crossed for reasons they couldn't yet understand. But what happens next? Will the teenager's life be changed by the note in his hand? And how will the millionaire's moment of shame affect the lives of those around him? Stick around, because the answers will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about fate, kindness, and the surprising ways life works. This story is just beginning, and trust me, you won't want to miss how it unfolds. Stay tuned for the next part, where the truth behind the millionaire's actions is finally revealed, and where the teenager's unexpected gift turns out to be something far more profound than anyone could have ever imagined. The train ride was almost over, but the teenager couldn't shake off the feeling that something significant had just happened. The note in his hand felt heavier than it should. He had tried to dismiss it, thinking it was just some odd coincidence, maybe a note left for someone else, or a simple message. But when the woman had handed it to him with such urgency, her eyes locking onto his, something inside him told him this wasn't just any ordinary note. He had never been the type to get involved in drama or situations that didn't concern him, but this felt different. He glanced at the woman once more. She had already turned away, staring out the window with a distant look in her eyes. There was a sadness there, a weariness that seemed to weigh her down. It wasn't just about the train ride or the discomfort of standing. She had a deeper, unspoken pain about her, something the teenager couldn't quite understand, but could feel. His curiosity only grew as the train began to slow down, the station approaching. But as the doors opened, the woman exited without a word. The teenager remained seated for a moment, staring at the note still clutched in his hand. With a hesitant breath, he unfolded it, his heart pounding in his chest as he read the words carefully, trying to understand their meaning. "You don't know me, but I know you. Your life will change soon. Be ready for what's coming." It was short, cryptic, and yet, it felt so deliberate. The note seemed out of place in the world they lived in, where people hardly noticed one another, much less handed over mysterious notes. What could this woman mean? Why had she given him this? The teenager felt a mixture of confusion and dread building inside him. It wasn't just the words on the page that unsettled him, it was the feeling of being watched, of being caught in a story that wasn't his own. As the train came to a halt, he pocketed the note, hoping to put it out of his mind. But that wasn't going to happen. He couldn't ignore the strange twist of fate that had brought them together. And now, even though he didn't know it yet, his life would soon collide with a story far bigger than a simple train ride. Meanwhile, miles away, the millionaire, who had once been on top of the world, was facing a much more immediate crisis. He stood alone in his mansion's expansive living room, staring at his mother. She was sitting in a chair across from him, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. The scene had unfolded so quickly, too quickly for anyone to process. Minutes ago, in a fit of rage, the millionaire had slapped his elderly mother across the face. He had never meant to let it go that far, but the anger had been too much to control. The confrontation had started as something small. A minor comment about his recent business decisions, a word about his increasing arrogance, but it was enough. He had snapped, in front of his employees, in front of his guests. The humiliation of it all, the way everyone had seen it, was something he couldn't escape. His mother, frail and soft-spoken, had been the one person in his life who still cared. She had always been there, supporting him through the highs and the lows. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten the woman who had raised him, who had loved him unconditionally. Now, in the blink of an eye, he had betrayed her trust, and there was no turning back. He paced the room, his hands running through his hair, his mind spinning. He could hear the whispers of the staff outside, the soft murmur of concerned voices. His entire world was crumbling. He was a successful businessman, a man who could buy anything, who could make anyone fear him. But in this moment, he was powerless. The mother he had once promised to protect now stared at him as though she didn't recognize him. "Why?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "Why did you do that, my son?" The millionaire couldn't answer. He could see the hurt in her eyes, the betrayal. His throat felt tight. How had it come to this? Was it the pressure of his success, the weight of expectations? Had he become so blinded by his wealth and power that he lost sight of the only person who mattered? But even as he stood there, frozen in his guilt, the story wasn't over. What he didn't know was that someone had been watching, someone who had seen the slap, someone who had witnessed the moment of weakness in front of his staff. That someone had a plan, and they knew exactly how to use this moment to their advantage. The millionaire had no idea that his life, too, was about to change in a way he couldn't even imagine. Back in the station, the teenager's thoughts were still swirling around the note, but he tried to focus. He had to get home, had to forget about the strange woman and her cryptic words. But the more he thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. Who was she? What did she know about him? And why had she given him that message? When he reached his apartment, he threw his backpack on the couch and collapsed onto the bed. His mind was racing, but he couldn't make sense of it all. He had always thought of himself as an average kid, nothing special, nothing that would attract this kind of attention. But somehow, this random encounter felt like the beginning of something bigger. As he drifted off to sleep, the words of the note lingered in his mind, "Your life will change soon." And that night, in a strange twist of fate, it did. The millionaire's life was about to implode, and the teenager's would be forever altered by a decision he had made without fully understanding the consequences. The connection between these two strangers, one with everything and one with nothing, was about to become clear, and the collision of their worlds would have a ripple effect neither of them could escape. What did the woman know? What was the link between the slap and the note? The answers were coming, but they were buried beneath layers of mystery, waiting to reveal themselves when the time was right. And for both of them, the time was fast approaching. The next few days felt like they were moving in slow motion for the teenager. He couldn't shake off the sense of something impending, something he couldn't understand. Every time he walked past the train station, he thought about the woman, her words, and the cryptic note that he had kept hidden in his pocket. There was a nagging feeling at the back of his mind that this wasn't just some coincidence. His life wasn't just about going to school and hanging out with his friends anymore. Something bigger was happening, something that he couldn't see yet. But what was it? What was this change the note promised? He tried to push it aside. There were more immediate problems in his life. He had a part-time job he could barely keep up with, and his mother, who worked double shifts just to make ends meet, had been more distant lately. Her tired eyes were becoming harder to ignore, and his father, who had walked out on them years ago, never bothered to check in. In some ways, the teenager had become the man of the house, taking responsibility for things his peers couldn't even begin to understand. Yet, in the middle of it all, he felt small. Powerless. The world was moving too fast for him, and every time he tried to hold on, it slipped away. The note was a distraction from all that, something to obsess over, but he knew deep down that it was also a warning. It was about to get worse. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, the millionaire sat in his office, his fingers tapping restlessly against the polished surface of his desk. The slap, the public spectacle, still haunted him. He could hear his mother's quiet voice echoing in his ears, the shock and disappointment in her eyes. He could feel it too, the weight of what he had done. His business empire, once unshakable, was now showing cracks. The media was buzzing about his fall from grace, speculating on his personal life, dissecting every action he took. His board members were growing nervous, and they didn't have the same loyalty to him that they once did. They were starting to question his judgment, his control. The man who had once been the king of the city was now looking like a puppet, strings pulled by forces he couldn't control. But the most disturbing thing was the feeling that there was something more to his downfall than just the slap. Something deeper that he couldn't name, something that tied everything together in a way that he was just beginning to realize. He had always believed that money could fix everything, that power could bend anyone to his will. But there was something about the way his employees looked at him now, about the way the world seemed to be turning against him. It was as if he had lost the only thing that truly mattered, his humanity. The guilt gnawed at him constantly, making it difficult to sleep, eat, or focus. He couldn't bring himself to apologize to his mother. Pride stood in his way. She had always been the one who held the family together, and now he had shattered the very thing that had given him stability. But there was more to it than just his mother. It had something to do with the people watching, with the way his actions were being judged. There were whispers, rumors, and he couldn't shake the feeling that someone knew something he didn't. Someone was watching him from the shadows, ready to expose him at the worst possible moment. One afternoon, while pacing around his mansion, he stumbled upon a forgotten letter from his father, who had long since passed away. The letter was old, yellowed with age, but it carried a message that chilled him to his core. His father had warned him, in vague but unmistakable terms, about the dangers of losing himself in the pursuit of wealth and power. There was mention of a family secret, a hidden truth that had been buried for years. His father had written that he would know when the time was right, when the consequences of his actions would come to a head. That time, the letter suggested, was now. The millionaire stared at the letter, his mind reeling. What could his father have meant? What was the secret that could ruin everything he had worked for? His family history, his empire, everything he had built, was it all tied to something he couldn't control? The more he thought about it, the more questions he had. Back at the teenager's apartment, he had no idea that his life was about to intersect with the millionaire's in a way neither of them could have ever anticipated. That night, the teenager sat down in front of his computer, mindlessly scrolling through social media as he usually did. His phone buzzed with a text message from a friend, nothing out of the ordinary. But then, a notification popped up, and his attention snapped back to the screen. It was a news story, one that grabbed him by the collar and wouldn't let go. The headline was as blunt as it was jarring: "Millionaire business tycoon slaps elderly mother in public, shocking footage leaked." He clicked on the link almost reflexively, curiosity overriding his better judgment. As the video played, he saw the millionaire in the middle of a lavish event, his face contorted with anger. His mother, elderly and fragile, stood in front of him, and the slap came suddenly, as though it had been waiting to happen. The crowd around them gasped, their faces filled with shock. The moment was captured in full detail: the humiliation, the disbelief, and then the sound of the slap ringing through the air. The teenager felt his stomach twist as the video ended. This man, the one who had everything, had just destroyed his own reputation. But what caught his attention wasn't just the slap, it was the unmistakable sense that there was something more to this than met the eye. Why had the millionaire done this? What had pushed him to this breaking point? The note from the woman, the one that seemed like a warning, now felt even more significant. The universe was connecting dots in a way he didn't understand yet, but he could feel the tension building. The slap, the note, the millionaire's crumbling empire, it was all intertwined in a way that would soon change everything. As he sat there, staring at the screen, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe the woman wasn't just trying to change his life. Maybe she was trying to tell him something bigger, something that would affect not just him, but someone who had the power to impact the world around him. But what? And how? He had no answers, only questions, and a growing sense that everything was about to unravel in a way he couldn't control. The days that followed felt like the world was tightening its grip on both the teenager and the millionaire. Each moment, each choice, seemed to carry more weight than the last, as if they were both moving toward an inevitable clash, though neither of them could yet see how or why. The teenager couldn't shake the feeling that he was being pulled into something much bigger than he was ready for. Every time he saw the video of the millionaire slapping his mother, it gnawed at him. It wasn't just about the slap itself. It was about the look in the millionaire's eyes, the desperation, the brokenness, the knowledge that this man had lost control of something vital in his life. Something that could no longer be hidden behind the walls of power and wealth. The woman at the train station had been right. His life would change. But how? And why had she chosen him to deliver the message? Was he supposed to be part of some bigger plan? The teenager had no answers, only questions that piled up in his mind like stones, heavy and unrelenting. Meanwhile, the millionaire's world was crumbling faster than he could fix it. His business was in turmoil. The press had a field day with his public breakdown. He'd become the laughingstock of the city, his once pristine reputation now tarnished beyond repair. The people he had once relied on, the ones who had worshipped him for his wealth and influence, were distancing themselves. Investors were pulling out. His board members were secretly looking for someone to replace him. His mother, once again, had become a distant figure in his life. She refused to answer his calls. She refused to see him. Every attempt he made to reconcile, to apologize, only seemed to push her further away. He couldn't stop thinking about that moment, the slap. It had been a moment of rage, a split second where all his frustrations had come pouring out, and now he was left with the aftermath. But it wasn't just the slap. The real problem, the thing that kept him up at night, was the realization that he had no idea who he really was anymore. Was he the man who had built this empire? Or was he the man who had struck down the woman who had given him life? What made it worse was that he was beginning to feel as though he were being watched. There were eyes on him everywhere. He saw unfamiliar faces in his office, people who seemed to know a little too much about his business, about his personal life. People who moved in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to expose him. He couldn't figure out who they were or why they were watching him so closely. But every time he thought about it, a cold shiver ran down his spine. And then, one day, it happened. His lawyer called him with alarming news. Someone had sent a tip to the press. An anonymous source had provided documents that threatened to expose something much darker than just a public incident. These weren't just rumors. The source had proof. And it was something the millionaire could never have predicted. The documents detailed financial dealings that, if they were made public, would unravel everything. It seemed that for years, he had been involved in shady dealings, laundering money through overseas accounts, skimming off the top, and using his company as a front for activities that were well beyond legal. The walls were closing in. His empire, once solid and impenetrable, was now riddled with cracks. The pressure to find the source of the leak, to put out the fire before it could spread, was overwhelming. And all the while, the teenager's life was becoming even more tangled in ways he couldn't ignore. That morning, after receiving yet another barrage of messages from his friends asking about the millionaire's downfall, he found something new, something that made his heart race. Another video had surfaced. This one wasn't about the slap. It was a grainy, shaky recording taken from what appeared to be a hidden camera, and it showed the teenager's own face standing on the platform at the train station, just moments before the woman handed him the note. The angle was awkward, but there was no denying it, it was him. And in the background, visible only to the keen-eyed, was the millionaire, standing just out of view, watching the teenager. The teenager's blood ran cold. How had this video even gotten out? What was the connection between him and the millionaire? He had never seen the man before that day at the station, and yet, here he was, connected to him in a way he couldn't explain. Questions piled on top of questions. The video had been uploaded anonymously, with no explanation, no text. But there was one thing that stood out to him: the timestamp. The video had been taken after the slap. This wasn't just a random recording. This was someone following him, someone who had known that something was about to unfold. Someone who had been waiting for the perfect moment to bring everything together. The note, the slap, the video, it was all part of some twisted puzzle. The teenager had no idea how, or why, he was involved. But it was clear now, he was caught in the middle of a conspiracy. A conspiracy that was much bigger than the actions of one millionaire or one random encounter at the train station. Someone, somewhere, was pulling the strings, and the teenager was about to be forced to play his part in whatever game was unfolding. As the tension grew, both men found themselves spiraling toward the same inevitable meeting. The millionaire, desperate to regain control, was closing in on the source of his downfall. His focus was narrowing. He knew the leak had to come from somewhere close, someone in his inner circle, someone he had trusted. He didn't trust anyone anymore. He was ready to do whatever it took to protect himself, even if it meant going to dark places he had never been before. The teenager, on the other hand, was about to make a choice, one that would send him into the heart of the storm. He could keep running, keep pretending this was just some freak coincidence. Or he could confront the reality of the situation, and discover the truth about his connection to the millionaire, the woman with the note, and the mysterious forces pulling the strings behind the scenes. The clock was ticking. Both lives were on a collision course, heading toward a climax neither could anticipate. As the tension built to a breaking point, one question echoed in their minds: would they survive the storm, or would everything they had ever known be destroyed in the end? Just when it seemed like things couldn't get any more complicated, a second, unexpected twist sent both the teenager and the millionaire into a tailspin that neither could have predicted. The teenager, still reeling from the mysterious video, decided to take a deeper dive into the details, hoping to make sense of his role in all of this. He started tracing the video's origins, the timestamp, the hidden camera, and even the way the footage was edited. There was one name that kept popping up in the back of his mind: the woman from the train station. But he didn't know why. There had to be a connection between her and the anonymous tipster, someone orchestrating this entire chain of events. But nothing could have prepared him for the bombshell he stumbled upon one night, hunched over his laptop, his fingers moving feverishly as he dug deeper into social media posts, news reports, and even obscure online forums. He found an article, an old one, about a secretive charity that had been linked to several high-profile individuals, including the millionaire. At first glance, it seemed like just another wealthy person's way of laundering their reputation. But then, a chilling realization hit him. The woman at the train station wasn't just any random person. She was listed as one of the founding members of the charity. The connection was more than a coincidence. The woman wasn't just a bystander, she was part of something much darker, something that went back decades. The charity, which had initially seemed so noble, was actually a front for something far more sinister: an underground network of powerful elites pulling the strings behind world events. The teenager could hardly process what he was reading. It was as though everything he had ever known was built on a foundation of lies, and he was standing at the epicenter of a storm that could destroy it all. As his head spun, he remembered the cryptic note the woman had handed him. "You don't know who's watching," it had said. Now, more than ever, he realized the gravity of those words. He wasn't just a spectator in this twisted game, he was a key player, dragged into a world he didn't even know existed. Meanwhile, across town, the millionaire's life was unraveling in ways that felt too coordinated to be random. The documents from the tipster had only been the beginning. As the pressure mounted, he turned to his trusted lawyer, desperate for answers. But when he opened the door to his lawyer's office, he was hit with another shock. His lawyer was gone. The office had been ransacked, papers scattered everywhere, as if someone had searched for something specific. It wasn't just a burglary, it was personal. Frantic, the millionaire called his business associates, hoping to get some clarity, but they all seemed to be avoiding his calls. The only voice on the other end of the phone was cold, distant, and full of suspicion. Every word that came out of their mouths felt like another nail in his coffin. Someone was out to get him. He didn't know who, but he could feel it in the air. Then came the phone call that shattered what little was left of his world. The woman from the train station. Her voice, calm and unsettling, spoke through the receiver. "You're not the only one with secrets," she said, her words cutting through the tension like a knife. "And neither are the ones who think they're controlling this." The millionaire's heart skipped a beat. "What do you want from me?" he demanded, his voice shaking with both anger and fear. "You'll find out soon enough. The game isn't over, not yet." And then, with a click, the line went dead. As the call ended, the millionaire felt a cold sweat trickle down his spine. The woman wasn't just a player, she was the mastermind. Everything that had happened to him, everything that was falling apart, had been carefully planned, staged, and set in motion long before he had even known it. She was watching him. She knew everything. And now, with the tip-off about his illegal dealings, she had the power to destroy him completely. But what was the endgame? What did she want from him? Was he just a pawn in her game, or did she have something more in mind for him? The questions burned in his mind as he paced his empty office, every corner of the room feeling like a trap closing in around him. Back at the teenager's apartment, things were getting darker by the minute. He couldn't stop thinking about the woman's role in all of this. Was she trying to push him toward something? Was she leading him to a bigger revelation? And why did she choose him to be the one to expose the truth? As the clock ticked, the teenager sat frozen, staring at the screen in front of him. The world around him felt like it was closing in, and the more he tried to make sense of it, the more confused he became. There was a new piece of the puzzle, something in the charity's history that stood out to him. It was a name. A name that kept coming up in all the records, someone who was connected to both the millionaire and the woman. The name was unfamiliar at first, but when he looked deeper, he realized the truth was even more shocking. This wasn't just any person. This name had connections to the teenager's own family, someone who had been silenced years ago, someone whose disappearance had never been explained. A family member who had been involved in something far darker than anyone had ever realized. The pieces were finally starting to fall into place, but the truth was too dangerous to even comprehend. It wasn't just about the millionaire anymore. It wasn't just about the woman. The teenager was discovering that his life, his very identity, was tied to a web of deceit, manipulation, and power that stretched far beyond anything he could have imagined. As both the teenager and the millionaire moved closer to the heart of the storm, neither of them realized that the real twist was still waiting in the wings. The stakes were higher than ever, and the clock was ticking down to the moment when everything would change. But what neither of them could have predicted was that the final revelation would turn everything they thought they knew on its head. The game was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The tension in the air was suffocating, the pieces of the puzzle now almost fully in place. Both the millionaire and the teenager were nearing the breaking point, both trapped in a web of secrets and lies, unable to escape what was closing in around them. For the teenager, the discovery of the family member's name had shattered everything he thought he knew. His family, the one he thought was just a regular middle-class family, was tied to something far more dangerous than he could have imagined. The deeper he dug into the connections between his relatives, the millionaire, and the woman at the train station, the clearer the truth became. His family's involvement in the charity wasn't an accident, it was intentional. A key part of a much larger operation. He was no longer just a bystander, a confused teen caught in the middle. He was a direct descendant of someone who had been part of a massive conspiracy, a network that spanned generations. He knew he had to confront the woman, she was the one who had set everything in motion. She was the mastermind, the orchestrator of the entire scheme. But where was she now? What did she want with him? The thought of facing her sent a chill down his spine, but there was no choice. If he didn't act now, he might never get another chance. Meanwhile, the millionaire had been pushed to the brink. His empire, once untouchable, was now crumbling. The media had made him a public spectacle, his past finally catching up with him. He had tried to fight it, but it was all too much. The debts, the shady dealings, the lies, it was all starting to collapse around him. His calls for help went unanswered. His lawyer was gone. His friends had turned their backs. And all of this was happening while the woman remained one step ahead, pulling the strings in the background, her intentions still unclear. It was only when he received another cryptic message from her that he truly understood. She wasn't just playing a game, she was orchestrating his downfall and the teenager's rise. Everything had been set in motion long before either of them had realized it. He was nothing more than a pawn in a much larger game, but the teenager was a wild card. He had no idea how important he was. But she did. The moment the millionaire finally tracked her down was the moment the entire story unraveled. It happened late one night, in a dimly lit, run-down building at the edge of the city. The millionaire entered, his heart pounding, knowing this would be the last confrontation. The woman stood there waiting for him, calm and poised, as though she'd been expecting this for years. In the corner of the room, the teenager stood, his face pale, his hands trembling. "You," the millionaire said, his voice cracking. "What is this all about? Why are you doing this to me? What do you want?" The woman's lips curled into a small smile, one that seemed both sad and knowing. "What I want, dear millionaire, is for you to understand what you've been a part of all these years," she replied, her voice measured, calm. "The real power lies not in money, not in status, not even in influence. It lies in control." The millionaire felt a shiver run down his spine. He could see now that she was in control. She had always been in control. "I don't understand," he whispered. "I've worked for everything I have. I built it all from the ground up." She shook her head. "You never built anything. You were given it. You were chosen. But you were too blind to see the strings being pulled. The network, the charity, the people you thought you trusted, they were all part of something bigger. And now, you're the fall guy. It's always been about them, not you." The teenager, standing in the shadows, was silent. His mind was racing. He had always wondered why he had been pulled into all of this, why he had been in the right place at the right time. But now, it was all becoming clear. The woman wasn't just playing a game with the millionaire, she had been preparing the teenager for something much bigger. "You were never meant to stay in the shadows," she continued, turning to the teenager. "You were meant to step into the light. You were chosen to expose the truth. To take control." The teenager's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't believe it. He was meant to be the one to bring everything down. All this time, he had thought he was the victim, just caught up in a twisted chain of events. But he was more than that. He was the key to it all. The woman handed him a small envelope, identical to the one she had given him months ago at the train station. "It's time," she said. "You're ready." With shaking hands, the teenager opened the envelope. Inside was a single piece of paper, one sentence, typed in a cold, mechanical font: "Expose the truth. Set them free." His mind spun. What did it mean? And what truth was he supposed to expose? Before he could react, the woman stepped closer, her eyes locking onto his. "You're the last piece of the puzzle," she said. "The world will know who's really in control. And it's not the millionaire. Not anymore." Just as the tension reached its peak, the unexpected twist came crashing down. The teenager, trembling with the weight of the moment, turned to the millionaire. "You don't know who you've been working for," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think you've been in control, but you haven't. You've been used." The millionaire's eyes widened in shock. "What do you mean?" Before the teenager could answer, a loud crash echoed from the back of the room. The door slammed open, and a group of armed figures stormed in, their faces hidden by masks. The woman's smile faded, her eyes flashing with sudden alarm. "No," she hissed under her breath. The figures surrounded them, their movements swift and deliberate. The teenager looked around, his heart pounding, realizing that the true orchestrators, the ones who had remained in the shadows all along, had finally revealed themselves. The woman, once so composed, was now visibly shaken. "It was always about control," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and anger. "But I never expected this." The final twist had been revealed. The woman, the mastermind of it all, was not the true power in this game. She had been just another pawn, just as much a victim as the millionaire and the teenager. And now, the real players were stepping forward to claim what was rightfully theirs. As the room filled with tension, everything that had seemed so certain now hung in the balance. The final revelation would come, but not yet. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. As the masked figures moved into the room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The woman's expression shifted from calm to panic as she backed away slowly, her eyes darting between the teenager and the millionaire. The masked figures moved toward her, but before they could reach her, she raised her hands in a futile gesture of surrender. The teenager stood frozen, heart racing, struggling to understand what was happening. He had come so far, uncovered so many truths, and yet this moment felt more surreal than anything he could have imagined. The woman, the mastermind who had manipulated him, had been nothing more than a pawn in a larger game. The true power players, those who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes, were now in control. The leader of the masked group spoke, his voice cold and emotionless. "You've done well," he said, his gaze lingering on the woman, then shifting to the teenager. "But this is where it ends. Everything you've built, everything you've exposed, it all stops here." The woman's eyes flared with fury. "You think you can control everything? You think you've won?" Her voice wavered with a mixture of defiance and desperation. "You're nothing. You're just as much a tool as I was." But the man didn't flinch. He stepped closer to her, his gaze unwavering. "We don't need you anymore. You've outlived your usefulness." The finality in his voice was chilling, and before the woman could respond, the group seized her, binding her hands and pulling her away from the teenager and the millionaire. For a moment, there was silence. The teenager stood in the middle of the chaos, trying to process what had just happened. Everything he had learned, everything he thought he knew, had been turned upside down. He had always believed that the woman held the power, that she was the one in charge. But now, it was clear that the true puppeteers had always been operating from the shadows. The millionaire, still in shock, turned to the teenager. His voice was barely a whisper. "What is happening? Who are these people?" The teenager didn't have an answer. He was just as lost as the millionaire, but one thing had become undeniable. The truth was more complicated than either of them had ever imagined. The woman had been right about one thing: the game was never about money or power. It was about control over information, over people, over the very narrative of society itself. The leader of the masked group stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the teenager. "You've been a part of something much bigger than you ever realized. And now, you have a choice." The teenager's heart skipped a beat. "A choice," he repeated, his voice shaky. "You can walk away from all of this," the leader continued. "You can go back to your life, forget everything, and pretend none of this ever happened. Or, you can help us finish what was started. You can help us bring down the systems that have been controlling everything, from the economy to the media, to the very lives people live." The offer hung in the air, heavy and loaded with consequences. The teenager's mind raced. This was it. The moment of truth. He had come so far, uncovered so much, and now he was being given the power to decide the future. But what was the right choice? What would it mean to fight back against the system? And, more importantly, who could he trust now? Before he could speak, the leader continued, his voice softer now. "You've seen the corruption. You've seen how it all works, how the elite control everything behind closed doors. The only way to stop it is to take it all down, piece by piece. We need someone like you, someone who can reach people, who can expose the truth to the world. You've got the platform, the voice. You just need to choose." The teenager glanced at the millionaire, who was standing a few feet away, looking as lost and defeated as he felt. There was no turning back now. He had already seen too much, learned too much. If he walked away, it would all be for nothing. The system would continue, and the truth would stay buried. "I'll help you," the teenager finally said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "I'll expose everything. But I won't be your puppet. I do it my way. The leader nodded, a slight smile curling on his lips. That's exactly what we need. A true voice for the people. It's time to tear down the walls they've built. The woman, now restrained and glaring at the teenager, let out a bitter laugh. You think you can change anything? You're nothing but a child. A pawn in a much bigger game. But the teenager stood tall. Maybe, he said. But I'm done being a pawn. The world deserves the truth. With that, the group took the woman away, and the room fell into an eerie silence. The millionaire, still processing everything, looked at the teenager with a mixture of awe and disbelief. You really are going to do it, aren't you? The teenager nodded. I don't know what it will cost me, but I'm not going to stand by and watch anymore. It's time for the truth to come out. As the teenager walked out of the room, his mind was clear for the first time in weeks. He had found his purpose. No longer the confused bystander caught in a web of lies, he was ready to step into the light and expose the truth. The world was full of corruption, manipulation, and lies, but it was also full of people who deserved to know the truth. With the power of his voice, he could make a difference. He would expose the system for what it was and give the world a chance to fight back. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead would be dangerous. But for the first time, he knew exactly who he was meant to be. And as for the millionaire, he was left behind, watching from the shadows as the teenager stepped into his new role. No longer the powerful figure he once was, he realized that the world was changing, and the future belonged to those brave enough to face it head-on. In the end, it wasn't about wealth or status. It was about standing up for what was right. And sometimes, all it takes is one person to ignite the spark that changes everything. The game had changed. And this time, the teenager was the one in control.